Okay, looks like we've got our computer problem solved. If you could all take your seats and we'll get started. Good evening. Welcome to the Monday, June 1st joint work session with the Planning Commission and the Falls Church City Council. Thank you. We are delighted to hear this evening about the West Broad Area Plan. Jim Snyder will be presenting that momentarily. Before we get started, Chairman Meeks has indicated that he would like to get upstairs to have their own meeting. And so I think the plan will be to have the presentation by Mr. Snyder, then hear immediately the comments of the Planning Commission, and then let you all go upstairs, and then we'll continue on without you, and the City Council will have our own comments and feedback on the presentation. So without any more ado, why don't we go ahead and get started? Anything to add, Mr. Shields?
I would just, before Jim gets started, we're very proud of the fact that we've been able to get produced for the community and for the City Council. This is now, I believe, our fourth opportunity area plan that we've been able to develop in-house. I think with a lot of public input, with a lot of sort of tapping the best experience in the community and our planning staff to produce these. We tallied up the cost if we had done sort of the traditional route of hiring an outside consultant, that where we are today, we would have spent well in excess of $1 million in consultant fees to have the quality of production that Jim Snyder and our planning staff have been able to produce in-house. And so this latest one, the West Broad Street Area Plan, Jim's going to walk us through it. We have been trying to have a schedule of approving at least one of these per year, and to keep roughly on that schedule, we would propose to the council that this be referred out and then brought back to you by the end of July for your consideration and action. But we will first get your comments on that tonight so we can gauge whether we can meet that schedule, but that's the schedule internally that we're trying to work through to produce a good product for you and for the community. And
Before you turn it over, I guess I would just like to add that I think the plan is also to have a walking tour, as we've done in the past area plans, so that people can see on the ground what things look like, what's planned, what's there now. And I think that's been successful in the past area plans and some of the projects like Mason Row. So I think that'll be something that'll be scheduled. Stay tuned the next month and a half for a walking tour. Tonight we thought it would be best just to go ahead and hear it and have a PowerPoint presentation. We are planning on doing a walking tour as well, right. So that'll be coming up shortly. But I would echo your comments. I've been involved in area plans in other jurisdictions, and I can tell you that they are tremendously expensive and time-consuming, and to do something of this quality in-house is extremely, it's just a great thing to be able to do that. So our hats off to you as well. But why don't we go ahead and get started, Mr. Snyder?
Referencing the walking tour tentatively, I think the manager has it scheduled for July 20th work session today, so we'll see if that holds, but it definitely is a very useful tool to see these places on the ground. We're very pleased.
Okay, I'm sorry. We're very pleased to be able to present in this work session to the council and the commission an overview of the West Broad Street area. This is the commercial corridor, Route 7. It is an area that links downtown with the West End if you're going east-west. It also links north-south, very large neighborhoods on either side of Route 7. So it's an important area, a linkage kind of area, and it has a variety of land uses and a variety of businesses and residential areas. Some of the key points in this, we want to create some land use nodes where certain things will be concentrated, like office and hotel or retail. West Broad Street and Park Avenue we hope can become great streets. Recognize and find ways to improve infrastructure, particularly for pedestrians, bicyclists, and the retail and commercial and residential uses. And also possibly have a terminus at Park Avenue and the W&OD Trail, where these important streets link through some kind of a special feature there. As the manager mentioned, this is one of a number of opportunity areas, and so far the city has done 3 of them: North Washington, South Washington, and downtown. And we are now working on 2 areas combined, actually. And we've done them in one piece because they are this important connection of West Broad Street. This gives you an idea of the plans that we're working on with City Council direction, and also the time frames that we're looking at over time. You can see the metro stations. These are radiuses showing the connections or the distances from metro. And as you can see, much of the city is proximate to our 2 metro stations. We have excellent transportation. We have I-66, the WNOD Trail, et cetera. So it's just a good overview map for people to better understand the context. These are the 3 that have been done: North Washington in 2012, South Washington in 2013, and downtown in 2014. We hope to bring this plan forward for approval in 2015. We started off with a community meeting back in June of 2014, and then we had a second community meeting in February of 2015. It snowed as we finished that. I think some of us remember that. We got input from staff, boards, other public comments, including VPIS, the Library Board, Department of Public Works, Transportation Planning. We had a work session with the Planning Commission in April, got a lot of good comments from them, and we're currently seeking comments from the council, other boards and commissions, so that we can add those in, revise the plan, and get it in shape for adoption in late summer of 2015. This is an overview showing the areas of West Broad Street and the West Broad Street corridor, the 2 that we are working on together. Along here, you can see a number of references to buildings that have been built, and also the St. James campus, and of course the City Hall campus here. Broaddale Shopping Center is in this area, the Byron condominium. A lot of development in this area, various types. This highlights some of the projects that have been approved. The Broadway in 2003, the Spectrum in 2007, that is where Mad Fox is, the Flower Building, where the post office and school board are, the Reed Building, the Byron Building, the Hilton Garden Inn, which recently opened in 2014. Mason Row is being talked about. That's something under consideration. The Kensington on the existing Burger King site was approved and will be commencing construction sometime this year. When we look at this area, this is the pattern of those uses, and you can see that the pattern and timing of redevelopment going back to the 1980s, when the old Brick House Square, this is a condominium area with, this is very popular and marketable in that time, condominium office uses around an historic structure, very attractive area that is very likely to stay that way for rest of time, really, because of its structure. A number of important community businesses are there. The Broadway here, the Reed Building, the Spectrum, which was a big project. We mentioned Mad Fox is there. The Byron, this is where the Kensington is, Hilton Garden Inn, and the Flower Building. So this is an area where there has been development. And of course, just to the, on the border of this area is the Harris Teeter Rushmark project, 301 Broad Street. There's about 21 acres of commercial area that could be developed. Now, it's possible that at 2.5 FAR there could be as much as 2 million feet of development here, which would be a gain of some 650,000 square feet of space. That's an estimate. The marketplace isn't always that efficient, and so we have a number of smaller parcels. Some small-scale development is good and appropriate. For example, Dominion Jewelers building that was built, nice 2-story building adjacent to the Rowell Court project. So this is an estimate, though, of what could happen. There is a lot of existing development, but certainly potential for more. The small parcels, this shows parcels that are connected or that might need to be consolidated. Some of them may get consolidated. In other instances, they may get developed on smaller sizes, or in some instances, they may stay the way they are. In terms of density and height, we think the most appropriate densities, and we heard this long and loud and strong from the community, was along Broad Street with density step backs and transitions to the north toward Park Avenue and south towards the neighborhood south of Broad Street. And again, here I would note, we have these very large residential areas on either side of this area of Broad Street. And so while the street itself serves as an important connector between downtown and the western end of the city where there is commercial development, it's important too to remember that we need to be able to cross Broad Street and connect across it to connect these important neighborhoods. In addition, there are important institutional uses such as the church, the City Hall campus, the parks. We have schools coming down Oak Street, TJ School down further. So Broad Street is a connector. We also need to be able to connect across and connect north and south of Broad, these very large residential neighborhoods of the city. And there's a variety of housing types as well, from Winter Hill to condominiums to townhouses to many single-family houses. Larger scale retail probably belongs along Broad Street, so and smaller scale retail along Park Avenue, coffee shops, local businesses, small offices, for example. Larger businesses on Broad Street where they have more exposure and where they can be better served by transportation and pedestrian activity. This shows the bus service along the West Broad Street area. There has been an effort to try to plan for consolidation so that there are good locations that serve both sides of the street. This is a representation of some of that consolidation that could take place. This has been this is part of the Mobility for All Modes plan as well, and the bus shelter master plan. There are a lot of improvements that can make this area a lot more connected and desirable. Those include adding pedestrian infrastructure from enhanced crosswalks, brick sidewalks, mid-block crossings, curb extensions. There's a lot of really attractive streetscape that the city and private development has done in terms of the West Broad Street streetscape, but there also are gaps where we have parcels that have not been developed and don't have streetscape, and those amount to barriers that need to be overcome one way or another. Also, the bicycle connection with the WNOD trail. This is where Route 7 crosses under the WNOD, and at Broad Street and West, the WNOD trail and Park Avenue connect. So this is really a connection nexus, if you will, of a number of transportation types of uses. It's interesting, when we plotted some of the, we did a study looking at where grocery stores used to be in the city going way back when, and they were generally in two areas. One was at Broad and Washington, and the second area was at Broad and West. So, transportation locations like this where uses meet do make sense. The idea of using Park Avenue as a good place for bicycles with sharrows and for pedestrians with some kind of a rest area near West Street is one that's in the plan. We've suggested as an idea perhaps a recreation of what was at one time the Falls Church train station. Other communities still have theirs, and they've done great things with them. So if you go to Vienna and Oakton and Purcellville and Culpeper and other places, you'll see these buildings are placemakers. We haven't got one of those, but perhaps it could be recreated and serve a modern, appropriate use. There are about 115 utility poles. This is again part of the you've seen them. At some point they become somewhat invisible, but over time, a city being in business for a long time, it would be appropriate to get rid of those, provide underground service, and improve the pedestrian connectivity of these areas. These are some of the most important streets in the city. To be great, they really need to be, you need to have room for pedestrians and trees and sidewalks and be able to cross. And while certainly utility poles provide utility, the same service albeit at great expense, can be provided with underground service. And we've all been to communities where they've, over time, taken that step. King Street in Alexandria is an example of that. Over the years, overhead utilities were undergrounded, trees were added, sidewalks and lighting, and Old Town was turned into a very attractive place. And King Street is now a great street. It wasn't always so, but cities being in business for a long time, these things can be done. So in terms of follow-up items, there are a number of things that would follow up this plan. We're continuing to work on the West Broad Street streetscape standards. The Planning Commission and the Tree Commission both would like to preserve the best of that set of plans, but also update them slightly. Park Avenue streetscape standards for that we think could be useful. Developing a utility undergrounding plan for this corridor and these commercial areas I think would be helpful. Perhaps looking at rezoning, streamlining when we have redevelopment, consolidating surface parking lots and reducing curb cuts, all things that will help change the character of the area from a kind of disconnected, not very organized place to one that really feels much more connected and is an attractive portion of the city's main street. I would like to, of course, get comments and feedback from the council. As you know, the plan is rather voluminous. There's a lot in here. And so we want to spend time and get your comments and feedback. But also looking ahead at next steps, this is kind of the timeline of what's happened since the first community meeting back in June 2014, and looking ahead towards continuing to gather comments from boards and commissions through June and into July with hopefully an adoption late summer by City Council. Thank you very much.
Okay, I know we're going to have some comments from Planning Commission. I'll turn that over to you in just a second. Before we do that, Jim, could you elaborate a little bit more on density, proposed density and heights? Do you have any more information on that?
We are not looking at the existing zoning, the B zones, for example. We have a lot of B1 and B3 zones, and they permit, they're basically governed by height and also by use. So, for example, in the B1 and B3 zones, they allow 55 feet, and depending on, with a special exception, they can have another 30 feet. Of course, that depends on the appropriateness of the design, whether or not there's a mix of uses that would justify additional density. If there's any residential, for example, it would need to have justification in terms of outstanding commercial uses. And so the existing zones, we think, provide appropriate heights and give reasonable controls to the Planning Commission and City Council in terms of allowing exceptions above or not above that 55 feet. In areas, for example, across from St. James Church, where you have smaller scale lots, you have transitions back to the neighborhood. You probably want to keep much the height of the existing B zones. Along Park Avenue, where you have transitional zoning, probably don't want to go beyond that by right height of about 45 feet. So we think the existing zoning has good guidelines in terms of heights. Single-family zones, for example, 35 feet. So if you went from 35 feet to 45 feet to 55 feet with additional height, perhaps at certain nodes or with certain justifications, we think there can be, we can work with the existing zoning we have to do the appropriate scale and height and density for the city. We don't have FAR, so we look at each project, and the council and the commission determine whether or not there's enough or too much and whether it's an appropriate design. Of course, the council approved the streetscape setbacks of 20 feet along Broad Street, so we will have bigger setbacks in the future, and there may be instances where you want to have more than that if outdoor dining or something of that nature is taking place, which might justify some moderation of height.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we'll spend a little more time on that later on, but why don't we go ahead and turn it over to the Planning Commission since you all were supposed to leave 5 minutes ago.
Hi. So after reading through this, I think in April we did have a meeting where we all gave comments to Jim, and Jim did revisions to this project. One of the things that I tried to do was to take this plan and test it against what ULI calls, there's a book that ULI just brought up called Building Healthy Places Toolkit. And one of the things that I found out was that all the points that were made within this area plan were really in line with what ULI proposed. So I thought, and that said, I think that this is a well done area plan, and I commend you for that. But as well, one of the things that came out of reading this and looking at what the ULI plan had stipulated was that I didn't think we had enough emphasis on, sidewalks. We didn't have enough emphasis on spaces for multi-generational use, which I thought was lacking within the plan itself. I think that, Falls Church is often accused of being an area for school kids, for parents and young children. And we don't put enough emphasis on looking after our elderly in terms of providing spaces where older people, people that are empty nesters can use. So I think it's something that we do need to look at. I know the emphasis on parks, etc., but we do need to have that mix of use within the plan itself. I didn't see that. Now, secondly, Park Avenue, I know is been said to be the Great Street, or we're looking at it to become the Great Street. Unfortunately, Park Avenue does not have, and I'd love to have Park Avenue as a Great Street, but I don't think that we have enough emphasis in terms of walkability and usability in terms of not cars, but human interaction within that street. And I think if we can put more sidewalks on that, that would really enhance the street as a great street for the city of Falls Church. So those are my general comments on this plan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I made a good number of comments on April, so I'm just going to make one right now. I think the plan is coming together really well. Well, one thing we did discuss in our April meeting was what to do with those shallow lots on one side of Broad, like where Spring is, where there's little houses that are businesses. And I just thought about maybe one of the things we could add is to try to look for similar types of lots in other cities and what kind of development they got on them that fit, because you can't really build to the back of those lots too well because they're actually on people's yards and they're just shallow, and there's a parking issue. How much can you build on there, still have parking? And so Jim, if there's any ability to find like some examples we could have in there to suggest to developers about what you could do with this that would actually fit the property. Mm-hmm. Because we talked about it quite a bit, and we were struggling with trying to figure out, like, could you put business condos and townhouses along there with parking on the back, or, so maybe some examples.
That would take a zoning change.
Well, I know it would take a zoning change, but I just think that I'm not sure the current zoning works for what could be developed on those lots. So maybe we need to say what could be developed and make the zoning work better for it.
We do think those are important lots, and while consolidation is a good thing, not everything needs to be consolidated. And so some small-scale projects that complement larger-scale projects we think are important. Even the Dominion Jewelers building, which was replaced a one-story restaurant, has added an attractive urban business next to townhouse offices at a scale that's complementary. So we think, to some extent, some of those lots, if we can reduce some of the curb cuts or combine a couple of lots, we can get scale of development that can do what you're talking about, that has an appropriate transition to the neighborhood to the south and provides some interest, but does replace what are some very tired, repurposed single-family houses, which frankly do need to be redeveloped, but may not need to be redeveloped at a mega scale. They need to be at an appropriate scale.
So I agree. Maybe Dominion Jewelers building could be an example we have in there. That was a fairly big lot compared to some of these others, but like two of those lots together might be close to that same size. So maybe put that in an example, like this is what we're looking for, because I think otherwise we get someone who comes in and tries to get like 6 of these together and build something big, and even with 6 of them, it's too shallow.
We have noted that there are some places where maybe more density is appropriate. For example, near the Flower Building and the large office building, there are some large vacant lots, and adjacent to Hilton Garden Inn, that might be an area, a node for office and hotel use. But some of the smaller ones to the west of there might be more appropriately developed with smaller scale that relate to the neighborhood and to St. James Church campus across the street. So having a variety, so it's not all one constant, skyline, or roof line, if you will.
I also had a lot of comments at our last meeting, and hopefully, I know that they wouldn't have been incorporated into this yet, but we're looking forward to seeing some changes. I'd be really interested in seeing the comments that the council makes prior to our next go-round on this, because it's really hard to go over it and make sure that the suggestions that we've made have actually been done.
Yeah.
And I know it took a long time to go through it and note on every page some of the suggestions that we had. So it would really be good for us when we do our final recommendation to council for approval, that we see the changes, and we particularly see the city council comments. My other comment is about rezoning residential to commercial. And Melissa talked about that a little bit, but I'm interested in knowing how many parcels that are now residential would be affected by this, and where are they? Are there any on the north side of Park Avenue? Any on the south side? I'm thinking about that street, and I can't think of any except for what we're talking about up at the west end, that would be changed from residential to commercial. Now, the transitional zoning, that's another thing. So do you have any idea of how many lots we're
Let me
looking
get back
at?
to you on that. I don't think there are many. One thing I would mention, there's a page we put in response to the commission's concerns, and perhaps this addresses some of the mayor's concerns. Page 3-14 under land use, where there's a diagram that shows how the tapering of densities and heights could be handled on either side of Broad Street and also toward Park Avenue. And again, it's a graphic. It shows the possibility of creating some pocket parks along Broad Street, but scaling down heights so that they're compatible with the residential on either side. And this was in response to some of the
Right.
comments we got from the commission. And there may be a better way to refine this, but I did want to point that out because we were trying to show in one page, a graphic that might explain some of that transition of density and scale.
So is the city council looking at this as a new document from what we commented on? Because we don't have that.
This does include everything in yellow, and we also have included in their package the updates we've done so far, because we've been trying to incorporate, as we get them, comments from the commission and other groups, including VIPAS.
But we have
and
the old
others.
one. So
Yeah.
when we actually get to reevaluate it again and vote on it,
Yes.
we will have a complete package, a new package.
You will, and we will also include, as a part of any plan, all the letters and comments and memos that we get from the various groups. They'll be kept as a part of the permanent record for the project and the plan.
Yeah, I think this is an important plan that, not that they're not all not important, but this is particularly important because it does touch on residential areas. And it incorporates Park Avenue, which we're really touting as our special place. So I'm hopeful that everybody really takes some time and looks at this plan so that we get it right. Thanks.
So we'll get you have a red line version of it? Yours is in yellow, but the equivalent of a red line that we'll get?
We do have an update, and we can get you the updated version of this as it is at this point, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm also, along with Melissa, concerned about the south side of Broad. The north side of Broad is pretty well developed. It has gone quite well along that side. We just have a few parcels that aren't developed, particularly like by Hilton Garden Inn and things like that. But I still think that the concern about changing all the residential to possibly commercial might not be the best of ideas, because in those the shallow places, there could be zoning that we do not have now for a few townhouses, because right now our zoning is for an acre for any townhouses, and there's more possibilities for fourplexes or sixplexes.
One thing I would mention, we have heard the need for connectivity across Broad, and one of the recommendations in here is that Spring Street be made two ways rather than one way. We understand the question about how that would function with the St. James campus, but we have heard the need for people to be able to cross and move through there. So that's a policy decision that would take some thinking, and there'd need to be, I think, good connectivity mid-block so that both sides of that campus would function safely for everyone. But that is one of the suggestions in here, is that Spring Street be reconsidered from a one-way to a two-way street.
I'm also concerned about this meeting, the time-wise. We're always crunched for time, and we'll not be able to have a dialogue about anything, so that bothers me. We'll be going upstairs, you'll be talking.
We won't say anything bad about you, though.
Go right ahead. But that is a concern of mine.
If we need to spend more time on this, we will.
Some of these we try to cram too much in small amounts of time.
Could I just add one point about the two-way of Spring Street? I wanted the council and the planning commission to be aware of the fact that in our discussions with the neighborhood about parking restrictions on the north side of Park Avenue, the church is concerned about their parking, and so one thing that we have been discussing is if we maintain the status quo of having better pedestrian markings across St. James and more on-street parking on St. James, it might make up for some of the loss of parking on Park Avenue if that becomes permit parking only. And we haven't made final decisions on that, but I wanted the council just to be aware of those discussions that have been ongoing over the last couple of weeks.
I just had a quick comment that relates to what Mayor Tarter said and then what came up about page 314, which I'm just looking at now. I think page 313, which shows the high and moderate density, I think needed more explanation, which seems like 314 is trying to do it. I haven't had a chance to read it carefully. And I know you said before about the zoning kind of dictating it, but with Mason Row, one of our big challenges is, how dense is okay and everything. And if we'd had this in place already and I'd already had that debate and figured it out, then in theory, they could ask for more, but we could say, hey, this was in the plan. So I do think whatever we can do to tighten that up in all of these plans so that we're very specific about what we mean by high and medium, moderate density, and where and what things may allow us to do more or different than what we planned would be very helpful for future efforts. That's my main comment.
I'm interested in seeing our changes because we spend so much time going through it. So in the interest of brevity, I don't have a lot else. I remain skeptical about this issue of consolidation, which you talked about in your presentation, just that's I'm not sure that's always to the greater good, but I think you addressed that later, so that's fine. Okay, thank you. I hate to talk and run.
Okay, you guys gonna leave then? Okay. Are we gonna split the check, or how are we gonna do this? All right. Yeah. All right. Thanks so much for coming out. We always enjoy our work sessions, no matter how brief they are with you all. But thank you for coming. Members of the audience, you're welcome to stay with us, or you're welcome to go upstairs, whatever suits your fancy. We are going to continue our discussion about the area plan. The Planning Commission will be meeting upstairs as well, so choose your poison. With that, why don't we go ahead and hear comments from council members about the plan as proposed? If we can, do you have comments, Mr. Duncan? If you'd like. If you don't want to, we'll maybe try to shoot in the other end.
Sure, thank you. Let me just take the first round to bring up a couple of things quickly. I think this plan is of greatest interest of any of the ones that we've done up to now, because the market and the plan are beginning to come together in somewhat closer proximity. So in other words, we have a project that we're considering right now in this area, and I think that's why we're doing these plans, to try to encourage the private sector to see what we have as a vision and come in and offer their thoughts about what they believe the market will offer. So to that end, I would expect, I would hope that if this plan is approved, that future generations of all the folks who are sitting in here will be here at future council meetings discussing projects that the market will bring to try to upgrade some of the underperforming uses along West Broad Street. Because of that, I would like to try to make the plan as specific as possible in a few areas that are likely to be flashpoints. Ms. Rogers, I think, is correct in pointing out that the residential properties that are most close to the areas that are likely to be developed deserve special attention. Anytime a development comes here, it seems these days we want a shadow study that tries to give residents some idea of what their light conditions will be if the building is built to the height that the applicant usually wants to build it. So I see that you in pages 3, 14, and so forth, the ones that were referred to, are speaking to that a little bit, but I think it might be helpful if you could just give us some, show us some sample shadow studies of what developments built at the standards that you mentioned, Mr. Snyder, 45, 55, 85, what that would look like in some of the areas that are largely residential across the street, or in the case of the south side of Broad Street, and the 4 little houses along the stretch from Spring to Brick House Square, the development would actually be like in their side yard. On consolidation, Mr. Meeks and I sound like we could have a real good long discussion over some beverages about that. I take a view that consolidation should be encouraged generally. I mean, I think what we see when we have a pizza place outside the Broadway and we have a nail salon outside the Byron and we have Beato's sort of stuck in between Spectrum and Reed, it looks like we intentionally mean for this to happen, like we have some bizarre out-parcel policy that we're pursuing. And I couldn't disagree more with that as a desirable outcome. I mean, I understand there's some quaint businesses that we might want to preserve, but by and large, I would hope this plan would speak to consolidation and view it in in the lights of the benefits of that consolidation, architectural, economic, streetscape, and so forth. So that's a thought on consolidation. Shadow studies I mentioned. High and moderate density. I would like to have taken a little poll here of the people who are here. What do you think high density is in terms of height, and what do you think moderate is? I mean, when I ask that question, people say, well, like 2 stories would be okay with me. Well, just not thinking that that's what you think when you say moderate, and it's certainly not what you think when you say high. So maybe we'd be a little more specific, and instead of talking in feet, maybe we talk in stories, like 55 feet is X, 85 feet is X. You referred to some particular nodes that might be suitable for higher height. I think we're looking at one of those nodes right now, so let's just try to be as specific as we can when we do this plan, so that future councils and future citizens have some idea what they're getting into, and developers will have a clear idea. I wonder how much it would cost to do 2.4 miles of underground conduit. Maybe there's a dollar figure. I don't think the city's going to pay for that, but would like to know what the costs would be if we had to. And I think that will be, oh, one other thing. In most of the drawings that I've seen here, the St. James campus it doesn't really kind of stand out. I think it might be useful. It's my assumption that St. James campus will remain in its current use in perpetuity, or the closest thing to that we can imagine. So I think showing that so that people can see, this is a big chunk of land that is going to have its current use forever and ever, amen.
Yes, it's actually not, it's a good suggestion. It's actually not part of the opportunity area, but it, of course, is within the confines of Park and Broad and these two areas, so.
Right,
It's a large area.
Just to show that so that, we have some idea of land that we could be talking about in the future and land that we're not going to be talking about except in the context of maybe we make Spring Street two ways. But, the use that's there now is going to be there for as long as we can imagine. I think that's all for now.
Thank you. Why don't we see if other folks in council, we can either go to you, Nate, or we can go to you, Karen. Who would like to go next? Or we can go to you, Mary Beth. You ready, Nate? Or? Okay.
So I have some, thank you, Jim.
Mm-hmm.
I have some specific questions just based upon these attachments and others. As I read this and I went to page 2-16, the thing that jumped out at me was the historic properties, and historic property 2 on here is the one that's part of the Mason Row parcel.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I was sitting here, I've been looking at this and I see that there was a line added to say it might be demolished, and then there was a line removed that said it might be demolished if Mason Row is approved. So I'm just wondering about those kinds of things. And
There was a demolition permit issued for that some years ago, and it was early, at some point in the Mason Row discussion, the question of whether that was still valid or not was brought forward. I think it went to, I believe, the BZA, and it was determined that it was still valid. There had been talk about would it need to be kept or not, or moved. And at any rate, I think the commission in particular did not want to have a lot of things in the plan at this time about Mason Row, didn't want to prejudice anything. And so that line in and out has been part of that discussion. But it is, it presently exists and it's within that property. Integrated into other buildings, or a piece of the old building is there.
so along the lines of what Mr. Duncan said, as I read this, I thought, this is exactly what we need to be considering Mason Row, or that what we have needed for the last year and a half as we've considered Mason Row. And it doesn't fit with what this is. So what Mason Row, the height of Mason Row and how it fits into the neighborhood doesn't fit with what this plan is. And so that is a little concerning to me. And then my other comment is also on about 313, and like the Planning Commission and others, I think we do really need to take special care of the neighborhoods here marked in red on 313. South Oak Street and South Lee Street, it looks like there are residential parcels there that are going to be affected and as moderate development, and then the parcels right next to those will also be affected. So I think that needs to have some special care.
And with regard to those, some of those deep parcels, the 4 houses that have deep lots, the back portion of the lot is zoned residential or shown as residential. And then one of the questions has been, is there a way to provide access between those parcels, ultimately on the back side? And so how that transition gets handled, the connectivity between those parcels without having individual driveways on each property on
Right.
Broad Street.
Right.
Those are site plan kinds of issues, but there are these pieces of residential to kind of between the established single-family neighborhood and the older commercial areas. So
Right.
those are some of the problems to be looked at.
Yeah. But if I lived on South Oak Street or South Lee Street, I would be looking at this going, oh, what's going on my street? So I think that's something that just needs to be explained well in those, because some of the Oak and Lee Street parcels are parallel to Broad Street, not perpendicular like the Spring Street parcels are.
Can I just follow up? I know that normally when we do these plans, we advertise to the wider community through our normal outreach mechanisms. But as I look at this particular parcel, and I think about the neighborhoods that are so close on either side, and I think about, somebody made a comment to me and they said, oh, you folks that live in Winter Hill, you knew that post office was going to get developed. But we didn't know it was going to turn into the extremely tall building that it is. I'm just telling you as somebody who lives there that while I understood that there could be development, I didn't understand that. Given some of what we're talking about here, I think before this plan gets to second reading, we need to specifically contact everybody along that residential periphery. The other general comment that I have, Mr. Snyder, is on the transportation section. I don't know that we do enough to talk about the extent of the automobile issues that we can expect to see growing on this corridor. I mean, I know we refer to the fact that it is a major thoroughfare, but I think an extra mention about the fact that we need to be considering and addressing the pressures that are going to come from development at Seven Corners trickling down and from Tyson's trickling down. And I guess one question that's not really addressed in terms of the volume of traffic that we know that we have coming is our goal as a community to try to mitigate that traffic or try to get that traffic to stop and spend money in the city? And does that impact the way we're developing this corridor?
Well, if we did nothing, we would have lots of traffic on Broad Street, and we will have more traffic on Broad Street as development on either side of us occurs. So the choice for us is whether there's anything going on in the city on Broad Street. You know, we are part of this. We want to resist, and the staff has been trying to do this. I think council's been trying to do this, resist people who'd like to say that Washington Street and Broad Street should be 6 lanes and widened out, and the city's managed to be a calm place. So when you go to Tyson's Corner and you see all that additional land that's now roadway, and then the metro in the center, and then the other side of that more roadway, we're not that. So I think the key thing for us is keeping the geometry tight and having uses along the way that the city can use, because there is more in the 24-hour day than peak AM and PM. And there actually are times on Broad Street when there aren't a lot of cars. And so I think as a city, we have to acknowledge that we're going to have traffic coming through. There certainly is the Route 7 interest in trying to get some kind of a transit facility. And we need to improve our pedestrian facilities. But, you know, regionally, we'll have to work to try to not have as much traffic coming through. But there's only so much we can do. I think the key thing is the geometry of it and making our part, you know, a better pedestrian place and more connective across Broad Street, so it isn't this barrier that divides the city in half.
I guess to that point, I would like to see more elements that talk about the walkability and how we might achieve that, and that are maybe a little bit more far-reaching. I know that people say, oh, we could never do it. But if we were able to put parking on one side of Broad Street during non-rush hours, that would immediately create a more walkable environment. And it would change the character of what this street is, and it would change people's expectations of what this street is. And it would go further along the way to, you know, people, we do have a reputation, oh, you know, the police will get you on, you know, on Route 7. You know, people, when I first moved here, people told me that. People from outside of the city said, oh, you know, it's crazy the speed limit there. But people know that. They know the speed limit slows down. And I'm just wondering what else we could do to try to make that more pedestrian friendly. I mean, I really think that the crosswalks, you know, putting in there that we'd like to see parking on one side during non-rush hours, we may never get there, but if you don't put it in the plan, it won't happen. And I like in general to see on our Broad Street plans more of an emphasis on how we could mark this as a place that's pedestrian friendly. You know, bigger signs saying "Watch for pedestrians," for example.
I would say I think the emphasizing the pedestrian and trying to reclaim the street is one of the key concepts behind this Great Street concept. When I was working in Arlington, we were talking about Columbia Pike. It was really seen as this, kind of a quick path to the Pentagon from Fairfax County. And there are less polite ways to talk about it, but the county rethought it and really has tried to make it the main street for the southern part of the county. And there was a lot of effort put into narrowing it down and not having more than 60 feet of crossing between nodes, keeping it as tight as possible. When it gets too wide, it's just not possible to cross it. So instead of being a barrier or a place you're ashamed to drive to, bring your neighbors into your home, it's a place of pride that says something about your community. And I think, speaking to Mr. Duncan's point, earlier council spent $16 million. There was a bond that built most of the West Broad Street plan. That was a great investment. And even though we're doing some maintenance, I mean, I've been looking hard at the brickwork and everything else. 95% of it's in great shape 20 years later. Could use a little maintenance, but it was a terrific investment, and it's helped make the city, a place. Finishing that work, just as Alexandria did on King Street, block by block by block, over time, and making these streets, reclaiming them for our citizens, I think is really important, and making it not look like every place else on Route 7. That is our brand, we're a different place than those places. So I totally agree with those comments, and I think we need to do things that are distinctive and do not look like every other place. People know when they're in Falls Church. We may need to celebrate Falls Church having a slower pace. I mean, I've seen communities, I think I mentioned this, the manager, you go to Folly Beach, South Carolina, and they say, slow down, it's Folly Beach. It's a virtue to go a little slower. Maybe it's a virtue to go a little slower in Falls Church, and note that there might be things to stop and shop for. The pace of life in D.C. gets to people. I think having a place where there's a slower pace is one of the appeals of the city. So could we turn that into a virtue? Possibly.
Okay. Mr. Burke, do you have any comments?
So a couple comments, Jim. Thanks to you and staff again. Jim, thanks again. Whoops. Jim, thanks to you and staff again for delivering on what I hope is going to be an excellent small area plan, and I think it's on its way there. I did have a couple general comments and then some specific ones, and I'll just go through them very quickly. And I'm certainly happy to talk to staff more specifically. But if we can just, as Planning Commission and others are going through this plan, if we can just check for consistency with the other area plans and just making sure that we're taking a holistic approach. Sometimes I think we may get too myopic on plans, and just want to make sure that we're sort of looking at all the plans in a holistic way and how they come together. And then two is format. I think Jim, you and I had talked about this before, trying to develop a template that's consistent. I think this is, but I haven't spent time with the other plans to just make sure that the outline of the plans are the same, so each one feels like, consistent. You can piece them together and read through the whole series if you'd like, and it makes sense and has a natural flow, and I think this does, but if we can just double check that. And then two, more of a question of how this is, and remind us again of how this is going to feed into the comp plan work.
Right now, there's a very brief description in the comprehensive plan about each of these opportunity areas. Once adopted, this would become, replace that content and be incorporated by reference as a guide for the development and future of the area, much like the sector plans have been in Arlington, where beyond the land use plan you have something specific that says, here's what we envision for this area, here are rules and ground rules that we want to apply as we look at projects. So it would be incorporated by reference into the comprehensive plan and be used as a guide for development and decision making by the leaders of the city.
And sort of to that point, I know that, the council in the past has jostlated all over the map. For example, I think the last time the comp plan was done, there was a comp plan amendment that basically said, thou shalt not put any mixed use on the north side of Broad. Reaction to other plans that were forthcoming. And then we've sort of changed it a little bit. And I think we're striking a better balance in this plan. But I'd like to see a little bit more direction as far as what types of usage we'd like to see following next. And I'd like a greater emphasis on office retail usage and business usage rather than mixed use. If there's a way that we can signal that the expectation of the council and hopefully the community as we're going through this process is, hopefully the next projects coming up are going to be office, retail, business usage, rather than what we've been seeing on mixed use, and signaling that very clearly in a visionary statement saying this is it. So developers, you're on notice. You're going to be fighting an uphill battle if you just kind of keep bringing in the mixed use that we've seen. So I'd like to see some, and I know that that's going to be a lot of art in drafting that and trying to get consensus around it, but I think that's sort of where we're at now, given what we're seeing on the horizon. And then chapter 6, and I think it shows up in a couple other chapters like chapter 3, this is design. I think we're using a little bit squishy language. We're still using should. I think in one of the other plans we used a little bit stronger language like must. Must be compatible with adjacent historic buildings, things like that. So hopefully that got changed in the other plans. So this is our opportunity to really say what we want rather than sort of this squishier language, if you will. And then on the general concept of usage, this goes to what I said a little bit earlier. I think a little bit more precise language on the type of usage that we'd like to see would be helpful, or what we're wanting to see, including sort of community types of benefits and usage. Whether it's a park, whether it's a ice skating ring, whatever it may be. Be good to start working those kind of concepts here. I know that the EDC was also going to be looking at that as well. And then I know that there's been some transitional areas that have been built into the future land plans that are in here where it abuts residential, but I don't think that's been consistent. There's a couple nodes that may be missing some transitional. And then finally, one thing I'm hoping that we can start picking up on all these plans, I think I mentioned it in one of the previous planning sessions that we did. If there's a way of starting to brand the city, this goes along with the discussion that happened based on the earlier comments. And I think I mentioned on a trip that I was at, and I'll leave the beach city in Southern California anonymous. For now, but let's just say it was not the nicest beach to go to in San Diego, even though it's absolutely beautiful. And I think the city or community somehow invested large amounts of money into infrastructure, and it's actually starting to turn around and become a happening place. And one of the neat features that they did, and again, I'm not proposing that we adopt this particular feature, but I believe that their bike stands use surfboards because it was sort of a surf town. Or that's sort of what they aspired to be. So if we can kind of think about things that we're already going to do, I know that there's been a lot of discussion about all forms of transportation, focusing a lot on bicycles and sharrows, et cetera, and making sure that projects have bike stands. And if we're doing it on public right-of-ways, if there's a way that we can sort of sign those and have an appropriate Falls Church thing, that may be a thing that we're already doing, and having also a real distinctive feature saying, you're in Falls Church. So with things that, should already be happening as projects are coming along, and just doing that thematically throughout the city. So I think that's all I have for now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Snyder, do you have any comments?
I'll wait until others have commented. I do have a few.
I think you're next. Everyone's commented, but you.
Okay, very good. Well, there's an interesting quote from Shakespeare that says, "The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves." And to apply that to what we're talking about tonight, the fault is not in our plans, it's in our implementation of the plans. So I think the fundamentals here are good. I think from what I heard of Karen Oliver and Nader Baruch, my colleagues, I agree with totally. But the issue is, to me, implementation. I think we have a tendency, number one, to overlook the quick, inexpensive things that we can do, like signage, in favor of constantly discussing longer, more expensive, more complicated issues. So whatever this plan is, I would like to see an implementation plan that moves rapidly to simple things like identifying where the parking is, like putting more pedestrian-friendly improvements in that can be done more quickly, even as we work on the long term. The second thing is that we have failed consistently to bring in, not that all the developments have been bad, but in my view, we have missed that element of the development community that is willing to take a risk on our community and really do some innovative things so that we're not behind the curve, but we're ahead of the curve or very much with what people are going to want here in the future. And the result has been, of course, much the same model, which has been sold to us repeatedly. It first started on, I believe it was Hillwood Avenue, when we were looking at developing the old school site. And we had our independent consultant and the developers come in and say, well, it's not on Broad Street, so we can't give you anything serious commercial. And we had Maple. Well, it's not on Broad Street, we can't give you anything much commercial, you got to deal with mixed use. Then it's Broad Street, but not on Broad in Washington. All we can build here is mixed use. It's not Broad in Washington. Well, we are right now discussing the area where we ought to be able to say, this is what we want in terms of rebalancing the residential versus commercial contribution to our tax rate. And it's a financial issue. It's also an issue of implementation, of being more effective at seeking out builders and developers who can give us higher quality. I don't mean to be negative about what we've seen so far, but I mean will give us more of the kind of commercial vis-a-vis residential development that will bring the kind of commercial occupancies here that our people don't have and that they want. So those would be the major points I would make. I think the plan is fundamentally a good plan. A lot of work has gone into it. But I'm interested in implementing it, implementing it in terms of short-term, cost-effective things we can do right now, and implementing it in terms of the longer term. What are we really going to do to improve our outreach to the development community to bring in the kind of entertainment, commercial activity of many kinds that we simply don't have in the city, and consequently, we're losing an awful lot of tax revenue as a result. And we run the risk of jeopardizing the very things, I think, ultimately that have made as as the news press reported today, our city the 17th most livable city in America. Not bad out of several thousand. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
before
of course.
you usually will want to close, I just wanted, may I have
Yes, of course.
one more since I went first? I just wanted to speak to Ms. Oliver's comments and what Mr. Jim Snyder said in response, and asks that, if possible, the introduction to the document in the first couple of pages might put the area that we're talking about here into a regional context. I mean, it is in there. It's on page 17 where we refer to Broad Street being part of a major regional roadway, but I just think it's very important, if possible, to include the concept as early as possible that, you know, what we want and what we do here in Falls Church is great, and we should invest all the effort in it that we do. But yeah, we have to do this with the mindset that things are happening, big things are happening to our east and west that will affect us. And what you said very breezily, you know, like, we just have to get used to the idea that, traffic here is going to move slower and slow down and enjoy it. That's the battle that we fight every time we get one of these projects. I mean, there's a substantial portion of the current population that just doesn't see it that way. They think if we don't build anything, that somehow the traffic will go away. And in fact, it's quite the opposite. If the Arlington experience is any guide, the traffic on Wilson Boulevard today, I think, is no more than, if not less, than it was 30 years ago when I used to drive it back and forth to downtown. Now, they do have the metro, but, if we look 30 years ahead, can we come up with some sort of transit solutions that will reduce traffic volume here in the city and perhaps regionally, as we do our part regionally to reduce individual vehicle movement? So if the introduction could just speak to that, I think it would help us have that conversation with the public. On page 2, section 2, page 2, I highlighted the sentence that says, soon after 1956, 7 Corner Shopping Mall opened just east of the city, followed by Tyson's Corner Mall in 66 west of the city. The establishment of these 2 large suburban retail centers on each end of the city along State Route 7 greatly reduced the retail market along Broad Street within the city limits. We all know that to be true. And the question is, what can we do here today that 30 years from now, people who are sitting here will say, well, that was a pretty smart thing they did, because they anticipated that things were going to change at Tyson's, things were going to change at 7 Corners, and they did smart things that made Falls Church a real place, a street that was crossable. Maybe it had parking at certain hours of the day. Because what you said about AM and PM peak is absolutely, we live in Washington freaking D.C. There's a lot of traffic here during rush hour. But during most of the day, there's not so much traffic up and down Broad Street. And so, can we get people today thinking about what we can do that 30 years from now will be looked back upon as foresightful?
Mr. Duncan, one thing that I came to mind as you were talking, and also thinking about what Ms. Oliver said, Mike Collins had a very good comment in that an example of something that we could look into. For example, he mentioned Route 50, for some reason, has a prohibition on truck traffic. And, of course, that's a very big road. And could we be looking at getting rid of that prohibition and perhaps having more of a prohibition of that kind of traffic on Broad Street, or even Hillwood Avenue, which is used kind of as a cut-through? So there may be some things. I thought that was an excellent
I remember raising that
suggestion.
question on the Transportation Committee in like 1987 when I was a new member. Like, why can't we talk about that? And why can't we?
And in the context of the 7 Corners plan, which is, looking at transportation issues, which is still working its way through Fairfax County, that's a regional and local, but regional issue that may be able to be pursued. I thought when I was reading Mike's comment, I thought this is something we should investigate at a higher level.
And if I could just one last thought that occurred to me. Listen to what Vice Mayor Snyder said. Sometimes it can be pretty simple, I think. I mean, if you're coming into the city from the west and you're stopped there at the McDonald's and you want to go to McLean, why on earth would you come into the city and turn left at West Street and wind your way up Great Falls or whatever to make that happen? Why wouldn't you turn left at Haycock Road and go to the... Well, because there's no sign there that says that McLean is that way. I mean, I'm all for bringing people into town and all that, but if, signage can encourage people to realize there are other ways to get somewhere besides, sitting right here in Little Falls Church during rush hour, then why not let's do that? And let's work with the county to encourage that. Maybe they need to widen the intersection up there at Haycock and whatever that is, Great Falls, I guess, so that, it can handle more traffic at rush hour. I mean, that's the kind of the reason that we participate in these regional fora is to have conversations like that.
Ms. Connolly?
Thank you. In section 6, character and design, there are 10 pages here on the West Street train station and the possibility of a rest stop, and which I think is appealing to some people and terrifying to others. And I think before we include that in the plan, there really needs to be a robust community discussion. I've heard some neighbors who live in that area that are not happy about the thought of having restrooms near their homes. Do we need such a thing? I think, and again, I think it's on the bike path. I think that's kind of a neat idea to have a Falls Church historic area, but we might want to just make sure that that is thoroughly discussed and vetted within the community before it actually becomes part of the plan.
Okay, I've got a few comments. I'll probably be echoing a lot of what other folks have said, but with respect to density and heights and uses, I think this 313 map probably could use some more detail. In other words, it's fairly vague. I know we have existing zoning we could overlay on top of this, but I think as a plan looking forward, it's probably, I think Mr. Duncan said this, and I would agree with it, that it would be good, I think, to have a little more detail on here in terms of what we're seeking in the future, regardless of what the current zoning is. For example, there's that shopping center that has the party store. I don't know what it's called.
West End.
Yeah, I mean, like, and that may be a retail node. Like, that may be planned for a retail node, but I'm not sure I feel that in this plan. In other words, it just kind of has this overlay, the strip. But in reality, that may be a node that is retail. They want to keep retail. And so that may be something we want to put some more detail into maintaining that use. So I guess I would maybe suggest or ask that you take a look at particularly this 313 and see if there's any more detail that needs to be added, either by showing specific heights or tapers, or maybe a third color or a fourth color that shows, you know, 2-story on the back ends, 3-story, 4-story, or some kind of note that basically indicates there really is kind of a more tapering here maybe. Just take another look at it, I think.
Your comment about nodes, I think we do need to beef that up, and we described them on pages 323 and 324 where we talk about some of those areas, but I think we need graphics that help.
I think the
make that a lot
graphics
more
are
clear.
key. I mean, I tell you, when I look at something like this is where I go
Yeah.
to see what you can do, and the narratives are kind of hard to follow,
Yeah.
I think, a lot of times. So I would suggest that either this graphic beefed up or a second graphic has a little more detail about uses.
Those are very helpful comments.
Yeah. Also, I guess I would echo the concerns about particularly the south side of Broad, where you do transition into residential neighborhoods. It's hard to tell from here what's currently zoned residential, what currently is comp plan residential. But I think for me, the idea of a single-family home, zone single-family and comp plan single-family turning into, you know, high-density business district is a major change. And so I guess I would like to know where those areas are. In other words, like another shaded area where you have single-family zoning on this map, where those areas lie. And I think we should reach out to people who, for example, abut an area or abut a lot that's currently going to be planned for higher density than they're accustomed to. And so I think that's just fair to the neighbors. And so I would echo Ms. Oliver's concern about really trying to get our arms around where those lines are and what may be coming, because before you know it, someone may come in with a proposal consistent with this plan that is inconsistent with our comp plan and inconsistent with the current zoning, you know, a la Mason Row for some of these projects. So I think this area needs a little bit more thought maybe, and just we really need to be careful about it. And so I would echo the concern about reaching out to those folks along that south side to make sure we know where the breaks are. In other words, which lots, is it a single-family house that eventually could be torn down to be put into a, 55-foot or even 85-foot business development through a special exception that currently is a single-family home. I think we should be really cognizant of those particular situations.
It may be useful for us to do a kind of a detailed blow-up of that area. We have the back parts of lots, some of which are split zoned, with which I think anticipated keeping density low and maybe having access points. And when we do the walking tour, you'll see some of that. But those are all very helpful suggestions. Thank you.
I've got a few more, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I would echo the general concern as well. I think it was Mr. Snyder, which is generally we can't adopt a plan and then ignore it. And I think there's been a tendency to do that. And maybe that's because there hasn't been as much invested as there have been in other jurisdictions. I've worked in other places where people spent years and years coming up with a plan, and by the time you get done doing all that, people are really hesitant to make any changes to it. But I think we need to be cognizant that if we're going to adopt something, we can't 5 minutes later turn around and just pretend it doesn't exist. And I'm a little concerned about that with Mason Row, as you pointed out, Ms. Connolly, that there are inconsistencies with what's shown in the plan, and yet we got a proposal right now that's inconsistent in some ways with what we're talking about right this minute. So we need to keep that in mind. I would ask you also on Park Avenue, is the entirety of the street itself in this plan? It looks like it's just the south side of Park Avenue.
It's only the south side, and it excludes the St. James campus area, for example, entirely.
But does it include the actual street itself? It didn't look like it did when I looked at the graphics.
It doesn't. It's, I mean, the way the lines are drawn, it includes the transitional and commercial zones, if you will. It doesn't include the north side, no.
Well, so I guess I really wasn't focused on the north side. I was really just talking about the street itself. Like, to me, that really should be part of this plan, I think, and maybe it is.
Well,
but
we definitely are trying to look at Park Avenue both sides in terms of how it should be treated. The way the drawings are, where the previous councils drew the lines, I think we're trying to only cover those areas where they were, clear they wanted redevelopment, or they were pretty confident. So we haven't changed those red lines, but I think it's important that we think more holistically about Park Avenue. So there are a lot of ideas in there about how that should be treated, and we need to treat the whole street, both sides. Yeah.
I think so as well, and just even maybe if it's just a narrative or discussion about that, but I don't think you can just sort of do one side of the street without thinking about the other.
No, I totally agree.
And then even the street itself, I know this is proposed to be a great street, and maybe a little more detail about how that might come about, because that may be part of what we'll ask developers of the south side of the street to do, which is implement the street itself. You're rebuilding the frontage. What do we want out of you? We want some narrowing of the widths. We want bike lanes, whatever we might want. I think that'd be good to have in here as well. Agree also the focus on pedestrian. I think this area needs pedestrian improvements. Even simple things like these big irrigation boxes, that are, these 3-foot boxes every block. We've got to figure out a way to just deal with those kind of issues without having our streets so cluttered. Yet we don't have bike racks. We don't have simple things like that. And so I'm hoping that the Planning Commission will take this up in the future, and maybe we'll come be seeing that as well. But the idea of these raised planters that take up 2/3 of the way, I think, is just not great. I presume as well that we're going to continue and focus on 10-foot clear width for our sidewalks. In other words, the idea that when we're all said and done with Broad Street, after any improvements, there'll be 10 foot of clear space, and not necessarily up against the shy zone of a building, but 10 foot kind of pushed out so there's adequate room to walk in. Let me ask you a question as well. What do you think the depth is appropriate for the south side of Broad for development? In other words, how far off of Broad Street do you feel is an appropriate depth to allow commercial development? Is it 100 feet? Is it 125 feet? Is it 100? What is that for development?
Well, I think the zoning actually is pretty good. You have about half of the block zoned for B, and some instances, like up at Broad and West, it actually turns the corner, because it's a cross street. But I don't think you necessarily want to go full block depth. You need a transition mid-block that tapers down. And the zoning pattern typically has shown transitional or some other kind of zone along the backside of particularly on Park. And on the other side, the land use pattern has also shown transition in zoning and pattern as well that indicates a lesser density and a scaling back of density. So we have fairly shallow commercial depth. That's one of the reasons for being more dense within those areas we have, so that we're not pushing into neighborhoods unnecessarily, but still getting adequate density to create a sense of place and activity along Broad.
So I guess my question is really more directed to South Broad, where you have shallow lots, you have single-family lots butting up there. And I guess really what I'm trying to get at is, what is the depth that is appropriate to have either structured parking or underground parking? One of those two you're going to have, right? And so how does that work? And we really need to plan for that. Whether it's 100 feet or 125 feet or whatever it might be to have reasonable development. I think we need to keep that in mind when we plan. If we've got 60 feet of depth and you need 100 feet of depth, that's just never going to work.
Well, I think the present lines are pretty good.
What is the depth of the present lines?
I think those, I don't know the exact depth of those deep lots on Broad. I'd have to measure those, but I think they're over 100 feet in depth.
On the south side of
Spring
Broad?
Street, south of Spring, east of Spring, south of Broad. The back portion, some of that is actually zoned single-family, they're split zones. But you may need that for interlot connectivity. I think that's one of the important things on Broad is having as few curb cuts as possible so you can have the best pedestrian connectivity. And for example, when the Dominion Jeweler building was done, there was an effort made to have connectivity between parking areas so that you could continue to connect in the back across those various parcels. So I think interparcel connectivity is important, and some of that can take place at the back side of those lots.
Yeah, of course.
Sorry. I guess my follow-up question is that I was struck as I looked at this plan that the development that's occurred on this corridor has all occurred on the north, has mostly occurred on the north side where there is much more depth. And are you trying to make the point that we may need to just bite the bullet and rezone on the south side in order to get significant development in there?
Well, we just need to know what we got. In other words, the first step to me is just what do we have and what do we need? And the second step is what do you do about it? In other words, it may be there's adequate depth, there's just not, the north is a more desirable area for whatever reason, for connectivity, for whatever it might be, than the south is. Or maybe the south just isn't deep enough. And that's happened in other places that I've worked in, is if you don't have enough depth, projects don't work. You'll never get development there, or you rarely get development there of the kind you want because there's not enough room. Like you need a floor plate in a garage, you need a floor plate in a building that's of sufficient width to make things happen and make it marketable. And so that's the first step in my mind is what is it? And then the second step could be is if it's not deep enough, then maybe we should think about that. But I'd at least like to know the first part before I get to the second.
And one example, and again, there is an office building across from the Flower Building that's been there for some time. It's one of the taller buildings in the city. Has parking lots to the east of it along Oak Street and then along the back of it. Those parking lots are not zoned the same as the office building. We had a proposal sometime back which kind of went silent of looking at adding a second office tower with some structured parking all within that property. Now, I think that was viable from a fit point of view. Economically, the owner, kind of put that on hold. But that is a place, for example, where you'd have to make changes to the zoning, even though that whole area is basically a surface parking lot right now. It's not used as a single family. So there are examples like that. I think we can take a look at, in more of a detailed look at how some of these sites might plan out in terms of is there enough depth and how could they be laid out.
So
Those are good questions.
So, to me, I wasn't getting at that side, which I think there is enough depth, but you go down the ways towards the west, and there's these little shops up the front, it was like Ledner's Music, and, some of these places that, to me, don't seem like they have enough depth to have either structured parking or underground parking, and I think you'd want either one of those two for any new development. And I guess the question is then, what do you do about it? Do you push the line back farther, or do you just say it's not going to happen here?
Some of that has to do with willingness there has been a resistance in some of those areas to consolidate. Some of that's ownership patterns. I think in the south side, because of the grade, there may well be able to handle parking and tuck it underneath buildings because of the grade that slopes away from Broad Street, and you be able to come off Spring into parking that could be hidden or covered with other development.
Okay. Has anyone talked to St. James about the possibility of doing anything? I mean, do they have any desire whatsoever to have, on Broad Street, any kind of, maybe help pay for their school costs? Is anybody?
We have not broached that with them. I think there is one parcel that they own that is an older house that's next to the Flower Building that's actually within the area and may be zoned commercial. There's like one small freestanding house there. But we have not broached the topic of redevelopment on that site, no.
Okay. Just a couple more little real quick things. I would echo the concern I think Mr. Snyder said about these low-hanging fruit. I mean, just like, for example, simple bike racks, not a full rack, but just a little stand where you can park. We ought to be able to be doing those things now. We don't need to plan this for 10 years. Coming up with some streetscape that we can start implementing, it doesn't seem to me like a 10-year plan. Crosswalks being painted, striped, again, doesn't seem like 10-year plan. Seems like those are the kind of things we ought to be doing now and getting this area to be attractive, getting people on the ground, walking around. And I would just encourage city manager, city staff to try to find a way to make some of this stuff happen without waiting for the next big project. with that, I would say you guys are doing some great work. I mean, this kind of stuff to have in-house in a small city like this, even one of the top-rated cities in America, is pretty amazing. And so my hat's off to you, Jim, and your staff for putting together something this complicated and detailed in such a short period of time.
Well, Garrison Kidd has done a lot of the work, but there's also one of the things he's been very good at is listening and incorporating information we get as we have these sessions. So we'll be trying to go through the comments we've gotten from you and the commission and others that we get and see to the extent we can incorporate them into the plan and improve it. We'll be trying to do that.
That's great. Okay. Well, listen, unless there's any other comments, why don't we go ahead and wrap this discussion up? We'll be revisiting this. We'll have a walking tour that will be publicly noticed, so people will come and make their comments, and I think it'll be even better seeing it in person.
And again, we'd like to get this done by the end of July, but it takes more time than that. It takes more time than that. We are trying to keep on a rhythm and a cycle so that we get these done and they don't turn into 2 and 3 year plans as they have in some other communities, and people forget what the plan was. And so there is a certain urgency, but not so urgent that we don't take time to get it right. So
I think we have last comment from Ms. Oliver.
Just a scheduling issue. I think that having this come before council in the regular session 1 week after the walking tour does not give enough time for feedback.
Sure, I would agree with that. Why don't we do the walking tour, see how things come out? It's likely this will end up getting pushed out a little bit. And so I think you're probably right, that's too ambitious of a schedule. But why don't we have a tour and see where that plays out? Maybe longer, what neighbors turn out, planning commission, other folks offer us feedback. So the point's well taken, and I suspect we'll end up pushing that schedule out.
Can we pull the walking tour forward?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I'll talk to city manager on Wednesday. Okay, I'm sorry, my mic's not on. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'll talk to the city manager, but maybe we could do that as well. Unless there are any other comments on the plan, again, I'll thank you for your fine work, and I really appreciate you coming out tonight, and thanks much.
Very good.
We'll be talking soon.
Thank you all. Appreciate your input.
Are there any other comments before we go into closed session? Does anyone have any council comments, remarks, et cetera, they'd like to make now? Anybody? So with that, were you planning on going into closed session here, Mr. Shields, or upstairs? Okay, so unless there's anything else, is there anyone else have any comments?
Just one question that I've been in discussions with staff on about trash receptacles in the first block of West Broad Street, basically the stretch that runs from Brown's down to the park where the Unity Club is. There's getting to be a fair amount of folks who are there at the ice cream store and the new restaurant, and I think Chris is looking into what we might do, but it would be good if we could, keep that on a track. It's summertime, people are out having ice cream, and it'd be nice if we could have at least one. There isn't a trash can up until you get to the CVS along that whole stretch. So something that Becky and Chris have been talking about, just would encourage the focus on that and maybe getting it in hopefully before 4th of July.
When we do those, can we pair those with the recycling as well? Like not just trash, but they're always together? Okay, good. Any other comments? Okay. Why don't we go ahead and end the public portion of this meeting? Thank you all for coming out this evening. I'm sure we'll see you again. Hopefully we will. And with that, why don't we go ahead and get a motion to go into closed session? So we'll turn off the mic. Well, I guess we'll keep the microphones on for this and then turn them off afterwards. Upon a motion made by Councilmember
Snyder, seconded by Snyder.
Okay. All right. And passed by a voice vote of City Council. Council went in a closed session pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A7 for the consultation with legal counsel regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel, specifically the negotiation of a cable franchise agreement with Cox Communications, Inc., and Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A3 for the discussion or consideration of the acquisition of real property for a public purpose, where discussion in open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the City Council, in particular the acquisition of property for Thomas Jefferson Elementary School expansion. Councilmember Baruch? Yes. Councilmember Conley?
Yes.
Councilmember Duncan?
Yes.
Councilmember Oliver?
Yes.
Councilmember Snyder?
Yes.
Councilmember Z? Is not here. Councilmember Tartar, yes. Okay, we are in closed session. Why don't we go ahead and get the microphones taken care of, and maybe can we take a break or two for a minute or two? Would that be good for everyone?
As a baseline of data that is useful for decision makers and to help with policymakers on land use. It's a tool for us to be able to also assess our model. It always tries to look forward. Now we have a chance to look backward and see how it did in actuality. And so that's the intent. We've not necessarily used it as a marketing or that type of thing. Others in the community are welcome to use the data in any way that they see fit, but the model itself is a pretty technical exercise, and we simply try to use it to get information out.
You have, though, I mean, judging from the materials that we've been given, devoted a fair amount of time to trying to present it in a
way that people can
in a way
understand
that's more approachable, right? I mean, looks
That's
like
true.
Ingrid's work is evident there, and others too, I'm sure. So I'm just wondering if this, has gone a little beyond the dry charts and graphs that we've had in the past and moved into something that we would try to explain to the people as a messaging exercise.
I guess since we're on the topic, I think there's some shortcomings to it. I think, first of all, it doesn't assess adequately the effect of X number of seats in terms of the need for new school facilities that aren't covered. So I think that's shortcoming number one. Shortcoming number two is that it does not assess in any way the opportunity costs and the potential other uses for those sites that would have been much greater minus the public service costs. So the comparison is somewhat limited because it's what was built versus what was there. What a fair comparison would have been what would have been other potential 100% commercial developments in terms of their net yield versus the net yield after the public service costs of these particular projects. Are they better than what's there? True, that's inevitably been the case, but are they the best that we could have had? That's a question that needs to be asked and is not answered by this data.
See, that's precisely why I brought this up, because, I appreciate the opportunity to message it individually, and I, as you know, have done it, ran on it, won on it, plan to, do it again. Hopefully I can win again on it. But there is not agreement on the City Council about the methodology that we use to produce these data, and it's kind of distressing because I know a lot of people devote a lot of time to it, and this time they've devoted even more time to it, and they have presented it in a more reachable way. And I think the community is confused when staff devotes so much time to a work product, which is put out as, the city's position on this, and then hears its elected officials argue about, its fundamental underpinnings. And I don't have a solution to this, but I do think that we need to grapple with it somehow. And if Mr. Snyder's concerns about it, as he expressed, are shared by others, or even if they aren't, I think maybe the model needs to include that somehow. I don't know exactly how, but if there is a belief that we need to somehow represent what the city would be if it were 100% commercially developed, then let's do that, because what we get is a product which a lot of people invest a lot of time in, and we don't really get that much public benefit in terms of understanding out of it.
Okay, other comments? Speaking of Ingrid, actually, I think we had a conversation on maybe having her come back in the near future, or you to come back and let us know what she's doing and what kind of work products she's produced.
Sure, we can do that.
Okay, maybe we can do that coming up maybe the next month or so.
Yeah.
That'd be great. Other comments? Anything else from council?
Just like to thank the mayor for coming to the Relay for Life on Saturday and offering some very nice introductory remarks to the group.
Well, I'd like to thank Mr. Duncan for coming to the Relay for Life. And, you almost won the relay, Phil. If you hadn't dropped that baton.
If you had not been there, I would not have walked that second lap.
We've got to work on the baton pass. We've got to. So anyway, yeah, it was a very nice event. I appreciate being included.
I'd like to thank you both for whatever you're talking about. But I'll also thank all the volunteers and city staff, obviously, on Memorial Day. It was a great event, so everyone involved deserves a real round of applause.
Anything, who'd you like to thank?
I just want to remind people to sign up for the community visioning on Saturday, the 6th of June. It's this Saturday. www.fccps.org/gmvision. I believe there are about 100 community members signed up, and the more the merrier.
And where is that?
It's at Mary Ellen Henderson. It's 9 a.m.
In the cafeteria?
in the cafeteria.
Okay.
Better if you sign up, don't just show up, because it helps to be able to count how many people are coming. But if you do show up,
I
I'll
won't
let
be
you in.
probably turned away.
No.
And I think I've been asked to try to count noses among council members who all is coming. I'm not sure if that's my best. But I think the organizers do want to know who on council is coming, and so I guess we'll try to figure that out. If you, we'll make sure it is. Yeah.
Okay, anything else, or should we call it a night? A motion to adjourn from someone? Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Abstentions? The ayes have it.